Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the FieldCraft Survival Podcast. It's Mike G, your host. I don't often host FieldCraft Survival Podcast because I'm doing Mike Force. I'm just doing my own thing. You guys can get Kevin Estella. You guys can get Amber, Kevin Owens, some of the best. Kevin Owens is launching his own podcast. By the time you hear this, you can hear his podcast because, man, he's got a lot of cool stories that sound cool because he's got the Irish accent. I have Jariko Denman, good buddy, Black Rifle Coffee, Marketeer. Is that what you guys are called, Marketeers?
Yeah, it's like the Rocketeer, but
Rocketeer was such a good movie. I'm starting to do like a Sean Ryan thing where I was Sean Ryan's first podcast. He's a good friend of mine, and he gifted me something on the podcast. And I was frequenting a local pawn shop, and I found a gift.
Oh, for me?
For you.
Oh, sick.
Yeah.
What is it?
Here we go. I have been holding on to this for weeks. I'm so freaking excited about this. Jariko Denman was a former Ranger, and this has everything to do with probably something you saw or never saw.
Yeah,
it's even got the price tag on it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I carried one of these on my ankle for the duration of my career.
So it's an Army Ranger knife.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. What does it say on it?
U.S. Army Ranger, and it's got some novice parachutist swings, a Ranger tab, and this badass trooper with his M16A2 at high port.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Rad.
The best thing about that is it probably was at a Ranger gift shop or something like
Totally.
Georgia.
No, this was on a table that was covered in like a blue sheet that was outside of the Sandhill PX, right? And there was like some old fat guy that was like, I was a sergeant major in Vietnam, and he's selling these. And this is the Ranger one. There was like a
Green Beret one.
Beret one, Army Infantry one,
Airborne. There's got to be an Airborne one.
Yeah, an Airborne one.
Yeah. That's all yours, man. And it only cost me at a bargain.
It smells like killing.
How much? How much did it cost?
$15.
$15. I might have talked him down a little bit. I might have paid $10 for that.
It's the best $15 you'll ever spend.
You're welcome, man.
Oh, dude, yeah.
That's something that I feel like should be front and center in your desk.
This is going up, on my desk,
dude.
So that people, when they walk up, they're gonna know exactly what they're getting.
Keep the price
a
down.
U.S. Army Ranger.
Oh man, yeah. So I the reason I want to have you on the podcast, and we've had podcasts on Black Rifle Coffee's podcast, and you've been podcasted before, but I kind of want to do a deep dive into your war experience. We took the blue pill.
Oh, we should have taken another.
Oh, we should have took those, dude.
That was some amazing memory unlocks.
Amazing. You had a memory unlock of an experience we did on a Veterans Day podcast for Black Rifle, talking about you doing this long range movement and then all this stuff happening. And I kind of want to expose people to some of the things that you've been through in a series that we call Resilience on our podcast. So we interviewed like Sean Kirkwood, Silver Star recipient, 5th Group guy, Kevin Owens. We interviewed Mike McKnight, who's the ultra marathoner. Just ran 600 miles from Mexico to Utah. And I want to walk through your personal experiences of dealing with adversity and difficult circumstance and how you kind of overcame those things.
Yeah.
As a baseline, can you give us some context for kind of how you grew up, how you got in the military, and then what was your military experience?
Yeah, I grew up. I was an Army brat. My dad served. I think it was 23 and a half years in the Army. He had a decent sized break-in service, but I was a true Army brat. He was serving when I was born. Through when I graduated, or not when I graduated, through about my junior year in high school. So I had an NCO dad for the entirety of my life.
Wow. Stationed at bases, I assume, all over.
Yeah, so I think kind of how I was like molded socially was, I had to be a very, and it's one of the things that makes a good, in my opinion, soft guy, like good team guy, good Ranger, good whatever, is just adapting to your environment.
Yeah.
Which every 2 to 3 years we were moving. So I was the new guy all the time. So I was also used to that, being the new person, having to prove yourself, having to prove your worth. So yeah, we went everywhere from, I was born in Washington, D.C. I was born at Walter Reed, funny enough. And then, yeah, we traveled overseas. When I was like 2, we lived in Korea for, back then a Korea tour was like unaccompanied, but you could sign on for an extension. So my dad was like, whatever, I'll bring my family over on my own dime. So we lived out on the economy.
Like a year. That's what is it called? Hardship tour?
Yeah, it was a hardship tour, but I think we were there a little longer than a year. And, you know, there's no infrastructure there for families. So they like found me a babysitter, some Korean lady who spoke Korean at home. So I was like at such an age, after a few months of living there, I spoke Korean, like as a fucking like 2 or 3 year old.
I love that.
Yeah, so I was my parents' terp. Like they would go out and go shopping, and my dad'd be like, "Ask him how much it is," and I'd be like, "I would, you know."
Because you're a sponge at that age, you pick it.
Yeah,
pick it up.
so I would like do all the shopping and everything, but I brain dumped that shit. I don't speak Korean anymore, but which I'm pissed at my parents about. I'm like, why didn't you keep me on it? Like we were in we lived on military base. So there's plenty of like Korean wives and stuff. I could have kept the skill up. That would have been wild if I spoke Korean for no reason. So yeah, from there, then lived in the Pacific Northwest. My family's kind of from Oregon, so a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest growing up. When my dad, anytime he had the opportunity to, he would get stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, just because that's kind of the closest thing to our family. So I consider myself kind of a Northwesterner, as if I'm say where I'm from. And then we lived in Germany for a few years. Lived at Bragg for a few years, Fort Sam Houston for a few years in Texas. So
wow,
all over the place. Some places, more than one. Lived a couple places in Germany. So just about 5 years total there as a kid. And then growing up as a little kid, it was like, I'm going to be in the Army. I want to be a Ranger. But once you start noticing girls and stuff like that, you kind of change. And so my kind of adolescence, puberty, all that, I was like sort of an artistic kid. I liked to draw. I still played sports and stuff like that, but I really, really enjoyed drawing and stuff. So my dad had it in his head I was going to go to art school and, be a graphic designer or something like that. But then, hit that age, 16, 17, where you're like, start to butt heads with your dad. He's not your hero anymore. And I'm like, I just want to get the fuck out of this house.
Yeah.
And to me, the fastest way to do that without being a drain on anyone was to join the military. And I, having grown up in a military family, the Army, I knew it. It was like home. So it was like a no-brainer. But my dad kind of insisted that I look at all the branches. Back then, at least according to what the recruiter told me, there's no such thing as a SEAL contract then. Like you had to go get your rate, do some time in the fleet, and then you could assess for BUD. So I was like, that's fucking out. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
The Marine Corps, kind of the same thing back then. It was like late 90s, 96, 97. The Clinton years, they weren't really hurting for people. They were actually trying to downsize at that point.
Yeah, I remember
so recruiting was they weren't hurting for dudes. So it was Marine Corps wouldn't guarantee you a MOS. They're like, you joined to be a Marine. I was like, not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that I was nearest doing was doing the Air Force PJ pipeline, something like that. But it just didn't. I just didn't feel like a big like draw to it. I didn't want to be a medic. So I didn't want to be a PJ. CCT sounded cool, but like even in that pipeline, you weren't guaranteed PJ, CCT, or I don't remember what the other one, the weather guy, whatever.
Yeah.
You just had to kind of like, it was luck of the draw, where I knew, hey, if I join with a Ranger contract, I'm going to be a fucking Airborne Ranger. You know what I mean? And then, a good piece of advice my dad gave me. My dad served in the Ranger Battalion for, like 4 years, early 80s before they were the Ranger Regiment, but he was a medic. And in hindsight, I now see it was sour grapes, but he was like, fucking infantry guys don't do shit. They just have to fucking carry a ruck, shoot a gun. That's all they have to do. If you're a medic, you have all this extra shit to do. Which is kind of true, but also not. So he's like, hey, if you want to do that, just be a shooter, like be an 11 Bravo. Don't be a communicator. Because I had a pretty decent, ASVAB score joining. So they tried to talk me into, do you want to be a communicator? Do you want to be a FO? Do you want to be any of these other things you can be with a Ranger contract? And I was like, nope, I just want to be a shooter.
A nug. Yeah,
I want to just carry a rifle. So that kind of got me to, the military. And then, I joined in summer of 1997. Did the basically the Ranger Regiment track, which back then was pretty fucking short. I just did basic training, Airborne School, and then what was RIP then. And when I went through RIP, it was 3 weeks.
I remember that. Yeah, 3 weeks.
I had a couple weeks of holdover there at Regiment, which kind of sucked worse than being in RIP.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was December 97, assigned to 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis, went to Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. And then, man, I think back to that time period of how just blessed I was. You know as well as I do, like, especially in the soft community where you're like being barren to standards and all those things, like a lot of it is personality based. Like you have to be in a platoon or a squad when you're a new guy that like vibes with you, and I was super lucky that I went to Charlie Company, 1st Platoon. It's kind of within the regiment, it's kind of a legendary platoon, the Mad Slashers, and it was just, I fit in. I wasn't the best at anything, but that was a platoon that like was like, all right, this guy's good at this and this and this, and they really like lean on you for those things, and they back off on the things you're not super strong at. I mean, as a Ranger private, I was probably a $135, and not a quick runner. I wasn't a super athletic dude. Playing sports through high school and stuff, I played ice hockey. So the first time I ran over a mile was in basic training. Being timed or anything like that. I trained up and stuff, but it was like jogging and shit. But like, I didn't really know how to run. My team leader had to coach me, like, here's how you run, right? Because I didn't know. But it was just a great platoon, like full of really good NCOs. My platoon sergeant was, his name's Jimmy Pippin. We call him Uncle Jimmy, not to his face. But he was like our dad. He was a true platoon daddy. Like,
squared away.
Super squared away. Hard as nails. Tough, but super fair. I think back to those times. If I'd been in other platoons, I don't know that I would have been as successful. I mean, like through my whole career, it was just such a great baseline. We had him. We had, this is 1997. There was not a lot of combat experience in the Ranger Regiment at the time, but we had, 2 Panama vets in the platoon, 2 Mogadishu vets in the platoon, which at the time, that was a lot.
Yeah. Any Grenada vets?
No, my first company first sergeant was a Grenada guy.
Wow. 83. Wow.
Yeah. And that guy's a whole nother story. That's a guy that should be on your podcast. He was one of the first Americans. He did his name's Larry Allen. He did the exchange with the British SAS like in the very early 80s. Had to go through selection. It wasn't like a gentleman's club like exchange. It was like, yeah, if you want to come, you go through selection. And his stories are wild. It's like that's the paper army, not the computerized army. So they kind of forgot he was over there. So he was over in the SAS for like 4 years, deploying. He was like combat action in Northern Ireland, combat action in Africa, and like finally he was like, man, he was in E6. He's like, am I gonna get promoted? Like, what the fuck's like? I need to get promoted. I've been in the army a while, and then they're like, you're where? Like, so they're like, oh, you need to get the fuck back here. So, but yeah, awesome dude.
Get that guy on the podcast.
Yeah. And he's just one of those guys that like the culture in that company was just amazing. It was like for a time that was very, you look around the rest of the Ranger battalions at that time, it was a super peacetime thing. It was very like, dog and pony, spit and polish. How fast you run is more important than how much you know or how you lead. There was a lot of that in the Ranger Battalion, but the culture in that company at the time was very combat focused, even though we didn't have really any real combat on the horizon. And it shaped who I was as a Ranger, soldier, leader, everything for the remainder of my career.
What do you think? Just on that real quick, because what basic training company were you in? I
was in Charlie 258.
Of course, House of Pain.
House of Pain.
I was in. So we went through this basic training at the same time. I reported September of '97.
Okay.
To Charlie 119.
Yeah.
And got to my unit after 15 weeks. I know we got it. Our shit wasn't hard. And every time 258 walked by and said, House of Pain, shoot to kill, I was like, damn, I want to be in House of Pain. Dude, I don't want to be in Hell's Kitchen.
It's funny. Like people, it's kind of taboo to tell basic training stories, as like an accomplished whatever.
Yeah.
Dude, they smoked the brakes off us in base. Like, it was hard. I had a hard time.
Dudes were trying to kill themselves. Guys were going AWOL. Like, it was not easy.
And again, I've talked about basic training before, and like, your indoctrination in the military. Like, I was already there. Like, when they gave us our uniforms, I knew how to put it on. I knew how to blouse my boots. I knew like what buttons you button. I knew all that stuff. I just knew. So like my bandwidth for the rest of the learning was like amplified, I think.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't have culture shock. I was used to being surrounded by the military. I knew, I call that guy sergeant. I call that guy sir.
Yeah.
Like, there were no surprises for me.
The customs and courtesies you didn't have to navigate.
Right.
Like, where guys were like talking with their hands and they're like, what are your hands doing? And you knew the deal.
Yeah, I already kind of knew everything. Mainly for me, I was homesick.
Yeah.
I miss my mom, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like I said, I was never top of the heap physically. Like, I had, I wouldn't say a hard time, but like, I was not like, your normal 18-year-old going to basic training that was just like, this is a breeze. You know what I mean? It was a little bit harder for me. The only thing I really excelled in throughout my career was humping. I could put a ruck on my back and just walk and be fine and crush dudes who were like really studs in every other area. So that served me well in Ranger Battalion, obviously.
Well, where did that culture come from? Because I remember, like, I got option 40, and you heard my story. Like, I got deviated to the old guard because they screwed up kind of my contract. And I was 11 Hotel, supposed to be 11 Bravo. They screwed it up, so they tried to make it right. They literally crossed out 11 Hotel after I went through AIT and wrote 11 Bravo. But the catch was I had to go to the old guard and put a 4187. So I went to Airborne School, Ranger School, while in the old guard. But I remember going back. I was at Benning for something. And I had just gotten through Ranger School, and one of my buddies, his last name was Barriotti. He was in 375, and I can't remember what it was, but I was around his. I was hanging out at the 375 barracks, and I remember seeing the guys operate, and they were so combat focused, and I was so jealous because I'm like, dude, this is why I joined the military. And they had nods, they had their machine guns, they were going cleaning guns, about to go on patrol for something. I'm like, damn, that's awesome. But back then in 90, this would have been 98, 99, like we didn't have an understanding what war was.
Yeah.
But you guys were so combat focused. Where did that come from the culture? Was it the G, or not GWAT guys? Was it the MOG guys? What was that stem from?
Yeah, we did have, I mean, I think Somalia changed the culture in Ranger Regiment a lot.
Yeah.
And it was a few years before I got there, but you talk to the Mogadishu vets, which there were a number of them in my company, not just my platoon. And, that engagement, or the multiple engagements that they had in Mogadishu, like really, I don't know, like they snapped the regiment into reality, right? Like they made some fucking mistakes.
Yeah.
And they really got it on. And then they like, okay, maybe it doesn't matter, how shiny our shower drains are and things like that. Like, let's go ahead and like apply common sense in a lot of areas, like, uniforms, slings. I mean, there were guys that had not caught up yet, senior NCOs, that they thought uniformity was important to the point where they asked you to have guys shoot right-handed that were left-handed. It was insane. But like, the Mogadishu guys kind of like weaned that out. The other thing was, and it's something, it's a good question because I haven't thought about this in a long time. The regiment was a JSOC asset, right? And we were on Ranger Ready Force 1, a third of the year. So it was either first, second, or third bat was on RF1.
Was that 18-hour?
Yeah, it's an 18-hour sequence. Wheels up anywhere in the world in 18 hours. And we from time to time got alerted and would do a spin up X number of hours into the 18-hour sequence and then get stood down. Like, hey, something happened here, and we'd get called in, jar shit, and like, so it was always, even though there was nothing like happening like during the GWAT, you knew you were going. It was there.
That kept the readiness culture on the forefront of the mind.
Yeah, and you down to you always had your bags packed. Your rifle was always zero. There was no like, I'm just going to put it up without zeroing it. There was none of that. There was no like, hey, I ripped my BDU bottoms. I'll wait till no, it was like go take them to supply, DX them, and get new ones and put them in your D bag because like you have to be ready to roll all the time.
Interesting.
So that I think had a big part in, our in the real world mission that we had was they had happened like within our generation, right? Like Grenada dudes got alerted and blown out and jumped into Grenada. The Panama dudes got alerted and blown out and jumped into Panama. So even the Mogadishu guys, that was like a alert in our sequence and boom, go. So like we knew that it could happen, and we knew and we prayed for it every day.
Yeah.
And the few without getting into it, we got alerted one time, taken out all the way to an ISB, rehearsal missions, and then stood down. So it was like we were close a couple times, to those like get alerted, blown out.
Was Haiti? Was that before your time?
Haiti was before my time. Yeah,
95 or something like that.
Yeah, 95.
Yeah.
And there were guys around for that. They got alerted.
That was close.
Yeah, like 275. I think went out to the USS Enterprise. They were gonna air assault, and then third bat was gonna jump in, and first bat I think as well. But so yeah, that was close. Who was that? Jimmy Carter ruined that.
Yeah, he screwed it up for everybody. Yeah. Let's as we get to Ranger Battalion, because this is likely where we're going to see more of the understanding of how you got through different difficult circumstances. Let's start off with Ranger School, because I went to Ranger School not as a member of battalion, but as a regular Army kid, and I was a PFC at the time, like many of the PFCs that were straight out of basic training, and it's where I really understood now the theory and then the application, right? Because there's a theory in the manual, the Ranger Handbook 27-6, and it's like, hey, this is all the methodology, but the practical application you still have to go through. And I saw all the benefit, and it sucked really bad. Like Ranger School sucked. I felt like it was going to have these peaks and low points. I expected that, but it didn't really peak for me. It just was a constant suffering and suck. But I remember there were circumstances where I had to like fight through adversity and difficult situations, whether it's basic AIT RIP, which I'm sure was hard, and then going into Ranger School, which you might have went down post-deployment. When you look at that, what prepared you for just getting through that shit? Because like RIP, you would trip a lot of Joes in RIP, especially that time where it's like, we only got 3 weeks to smoke the dog crap out of these dudes.
Yeah.
What were some of the tactics that you utilized, and do you have any examples of it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for RIP, I didn't really have any yet, man. Like, I remember the culture shock of RIP. Like, you remember in basic training, you do a foot march, like a road march, whatever. They had you like, you did like a 4, a 6, an 8, a 12, and a 15. And I remember on those road march days, like they kind of took it easy on you the rest of the day. Remember that?
Yeah.
They were like, oh, you can wear tennis shoes or flip flops around, and I remember we did, and this is RIP, not Ranger School, but did a road march out to what they call Cole Range, which is where they like, it's kind of the where the suck happens for RIP. Cole Range. It's just a land nav course, a big open field, but they just
smoke the crap,
smoke the brakes out. Like they just make your life suck for 7 or 8 days or whatever it was. And you do a 6-mile road march to get out there. And I remember coming into the little area where they have you put your rucks in formation and stuff. I was like, whew, oh man, this is good. Take a little break now. And we get in and Cole Range is the spot where they kind of like do most of the stuff is a compass dead reckoning course. So it's a huge open field. It's like I guess like 1,200 meters across by 1,200 meters across, and it's got all those points. So you like do the thing where you put your poncho over your head and you take your compass and you just dead reckon. It tells you your drift. That's what that place was made for.
Oh, interesting.
But it's just an open field, and if you talk to a regiment guy and you say hit the wood line, it's like a thing. So we're getting ready, and they're like, why are you taking your rucks off? Hit the wood line. And, there's a bunch of recycles and stuff that know what that means. So they just start taking off towards this wood line. It's like 1,200 meters away. Oof. And I'm like, what? So I like start running after this dude, and I'm like, oh, man, this is a new, different world. Like, this is hard. And And yeah, like at that point, I was so young. I think I did learn, you know, some resilience things by the time I got to Ranger School, because life in battalion was, as a new guy, was hard. And it was a grind. You know what I mean? Like in RIP, you kind of had these horizons to run towards. You know what I mean? Like, all right, we're going to be out here at Coal Range for, you know, 5, 6 days, 7 days. I don't remember what it was, but it was like, I know I'm going home on Friday. Like, I know I'm going back to the bees on Friday. And I could just kind of work towards that. We had one of my drill sergeants was a Ranger Regiment guy, and he was great. His name was Matt Walker. He was later the 375 CSM.
Oh, wow.
And he would pull the RIP guys aside from all the platoons and just say, hey, you know, just give us little pointers, which was, in hindsight, man, that was really cool of him. Like,
in basic.
Yeah,
That's
in basic
awesome.
training, you know, he could have been like, good luck, boys.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, he said, hey, just quit tomorrow. Like, that's what he said. I'll quit tomorrow after chow was his exact thing, you know? And that was kind of my thing as a youngster. Like, I'll quit tomorrow after chow. Like, and also, in everything I ever did, no matter what school or selection it was, the people who failed usually self-selected. Whether they failed a gate or they quit, there was some form of self-selection there. Like, hey, I'm not going to put in the time and effort to study for this critical task, or I'm going to quit, or whatever. There was a decision that was a self-select. And my mindset was always, you may kick me out of here, but I'm not going to kick myself out, right? I'm not going to self-select. So if I have, you know, a test, I'm going to study until midnight, and I'm going to pass that test. If I have, you know, a non-standard physical event, and everybody's smoking my bags and I'm falling the fuck out, you're going to have to come here and put me on a truck. I'm not going to say, oh, I can't keep up, I quit. You know what I mean? So that was always my thing, is like, I'm good with failure. I'm not good with self-selecting the failure.
Is that come from your childhood experience? Is that disappointing your parents? What was the mechanism for you not to tap out? Or was that just ego, your personal ego?
I think a lot of it, I mean, it was not exactly a very, like, I'm not super proud. A lot of it was fear of failure. Like, hey, this has been this thing I've been working for this whole time. Like, what am I going to do if I fail this? Like, I'm scared of that. But also, you know, I grew up, you know, Ranger dad, like, never quit. I quit one thing in my life. Like, people, I always give my dad shit for this. He's like, you quit one thing, you'll be a quitter the rest of your life. You know what I mean? I quit fast pitch baseball. During tryouts. It's the maddest my dad's ever been at me. And it was the last day of tryouts, and I didn't quit because I wasn't good. I hated it because there was this kid, I can't remember his name now, but it was like the first year of fast pitch, like not T-ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
a
I remember
young ass kid throwing a ball, or
throwing
is it coach pitch?
No, it's a kid.
Oh shit!
Throwing a ball, just beaning me. Like, I got hit with that ball like 20 times during the course of these tryouts, and it sucked. I was like all bruised up. I got hit in the head once, and I was like, dude, that sucks. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm like not having fun. This is a game. You know what I mean? And my dad, ooh, man, you quit one thing, you'd be quitter the rest of your life, blah, blah, blah. I mean,
you're like, well, I quit.
Yeah, I never quit anything since. And, you know, my dad always had us participate in sports. Every season there was a sport. We were in a sport.
Yeah.
And
voluntold,
yeah, and you had to see it through. I think, you know, I don't know if I've ever talked about it with you, but me and my brother Travis, when we lived in Germany, our school was grades 7 through 12 because it was a DoD school. So he was a senior, grade 12. I was a 7th grader.
Oh, wow.
So we got to play on the same sports teams.
Wow.
You know, if you were in 7th or 8th grade, it was like intramural. You know, you weren't a varsity or junior varsity. It was intramural, but you still you practice together and all that. And my brother was a wrestler. And he's like, you should wrestle. And I was like, okay. That wrestling season is everything I've ever done. That wrestling season's the hardest thing I've ever done physically in my life.
Wow.
Our coach was the base chaplain who'd been on the he wasn't on the Olympic team. He was on the Goodwill Games team for the USA. because the Olympics got, boycotted that year because of Russia invading Afghanistan. But that guy was a maniac. Like I looked, and he also coached the base. Like back then, bases all had sports teams. I think they still may, but it's less of a thing. But so he coached the base wrestling team with all the GIs that wrestled. So all those guys were like our assistant coaches. So you got
SF guys,
21, 22 year. It was in Germany. It was like they were all grunts. They were all like infantry dudes or tankers.
Yeah.
But these were some tough dudes, and they're like grown men.
Grew up wrestling.
Yeah.
And then they're wrestling as adults.
Yeah, like giant gobs of cauliflower on their ears,
Smashing little kids.
Just crushing us, man.
Yeah.
Like we had this small wrestling room and they would crank the heaters up, and our uniform, they had a uniform we had to wear. We had to wear like thermals, sweats, put our hood on. We wore a beanie, put a hood on and cinch the hood down. And you would weigh in and weigh out of practice. And if you didn't lose at least like 2 or 3 pounds, they'd be like, get back in there. And like guys I remember specific memory with my brother who was a senior. He passed out. Like he was a heat casualty, passed out in practice. His name was Brent Causey. Coach Causey grabbed his ankle, opened the door, dragged him out, dropped him, and just came back in. Didn't give a shit.
Wow.
Like you'd go to jail for that now. Even that's like,
yeah,
you can't even do that in the military now.
Yeah.
But I stuck with it. I think that experience really showed me how to take my mind somewhere else. That porthole effect, like just my body keeps going.
Your happy place. Finding your happy place.
Finding my happy place. I credit that with that.
How old were you then?
12.
Wow. And just for reference, his brother Travis, who was a Ranger, who was my small unit tactics instructor in SF, and also we were on the same sniper team, has a experience. You could listen to his podcast on the Black Rifle Coffee podcast under Travis Denman. So just for your reference.
Yeah.
And he was in Mogadishu. He did the rotation after the Mog, got his combat scroll for Mogadishu, and then wound up being one of the best small unit tactics. He was the best small unit tactics instructor in the Q course, and he was my instructor as well. It was a rad time, but that just for reference.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that whole thing, then, I kind of, once I was a little older and I kind of figured out, hey, this is like what I like doing, I started playing ice hockey, which that gave me a good amount of, I've talked about before, like violence inoculation,
smashing head to head.
Yeah. Fighting,
often.
like, so when I got to battalion, as a new guy, that was a huge part of the culture, was fighting. Mm-hmm. Like you're the new guy and like another squad's walking across the quad and they have a new guy. Your squad leader's like, go beat the shit out of that other new guy. Don't let us down. So you just fight almost every day. You're getting in like a fight. So yeah, I think, all that stuff kind of like set me up for success of like, I already was comfortable in some of those environments. Even though I wasn't necessarily the most talented person physically, I was used to suffering. I was used to violence. I was used to pain. And then, so like the things in RIP were just, I was able to go to those happy places. It was a winter class. It really sucked. We had pretty good attrition. I think 30% passed, which for RIP back then was pretty good. Just a lot of dudes quit. And I just remember, my whole platoon was Ranger contracts. So like
at 258 in basic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we get out to Cole Range and dudes just start quitting. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we've been talking about being Rangers for like our last,
months,
5-6 months together. And you just quit, like, because you're cold. Like, the sun's going to come out tomorrow, bro. And you're going to be warm again.
And you're young with this introspect. Like, while others are falling to the wayside, you're kind of like, hey guys, I'm being optimistic here. We're going to be okay. Like, we're going to get through this. Are you coaching people at the time?
Yeah, some. But I also, having been like in kind of on the inside, I was like, hey, if I need to coach you, if I need to help you out, if I need to like pep talk you, I don't want you with me.
Yeah.
Like there was like if a dude was dragging ass, like, come on, man, let's go, that type thing. But if a guy was like, man, I don't think I can hack this anymore, I think I'm going to quit, I'd be like, yeah, you should.
Interesting.
You know? Because I didn't want that with me. And also another variable of like the selection process, or really anything I've done in the military, is like I called it the quickening, you know. When someone quits, it like gives me a little bit of energy.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember that first night in RIP out at Cole Range when, I mean, it was like worst possible weather scenario. It's like 35 degrees and raining, you know, just you wish it was 32 so it could snow, you know, or warm up. So cold, like almost the coldest I've ever been on. And dudes are just quitting left and right. And I'm like, guys, we're in a training environment. I know they're not going to let us die. You know, they can't. They'll get in trouble. You know, and yeah, just kind of under. The other thing is, I knew that horizon I was trying to get to. I kind of knew what life would be like once I reached that point. Whereas I think a lot of people in that scenario, they're like, "This is just what it's like. I'm just gonna.
This is life.
This is life now.
Yeah.
I don't want this." You know.
Yeah. I can't remember who was telling me. It was like, they said, whenever you're happy, no one thinks that that's going to be the way it is. They always think that's temporary. But when you're suffering, you always think that's going to be the way it is,
right?
Forever.
Yeah, it's a funny thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. You get to battalion and you go to Ranger School, and is Ranger School just a different level of suck? And it's different. I noticed as a student there, for guys from Ranger Battalion, the stakes are higher.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to Ranger School, you're not going to be in battalion.
Right.
And so I noticed the culture, the RIs understood that. And not to say they gave you guys slack, because they didn't, but they facilitated and worked with guys to like, hey man, you pull your head out of your ass. Versus a regular Army kid or especially officers who are in the regular Army, they're just like sink or swim, right? How was that overall experience for you?
Yeah, I do definitely. That was a thing. You know, I went there. I was a 19-year-old PFC, went to a winter class, but I had been, you know, living and training in Fort Lewis. I was used to being cold, wet, miserable. That wasn't a factor. The thing that really kind of sank in Ranger School that made it an especially hard experience for me was the academic aspect. Whereas, you know, everything else I'd done, it was like plop one foot in front of the other until it's over and you're going to be fine. Like watch your sector, plop one foot in front of the other. Don't be late, don't be light, be in the right uniform.
Yep.
And you're good to go. Whereas Ranger School, I had to be a leader. I had to be a platoon sergeant. I had to be a platoon leader as a 19-year-old kid who hadn't been in charge of anything except maybe another new guy. And, you know, looking back now, growing up, I definitely had ADHD. I couldn't, book learning was hard for me, right? So I had really no, it's funny, I had no grasp of the op order. I had no grasp of TLPs the day I graduated. I still didn't know how to do it. But what I did know how to do was be a new guy and show my value. So, you know, those officers that had been writing op orders for the last year of their life, but they didn't really have any grit, you know. If I carried 30 pounds of their shit, they would write my op order.
I love that trade-off, man.
Yeah, I did too.
I love it.
And that made me feel good. It made me feel comfortable. Like, all right, I am doing my part, you know. So I think that was what really weighed on me in Ranger School was like, I never really knew what was going on. As funny as it is to say that, like I had to do land nav 3 times. Like, I don't know if you remember, like in Darby and Rap Week, you do land nav. Well, they had us do it, test, retest. And then they were like, you go through Darby when everybody else comes back from the field in Darby. They had the guys who had double no-go
one more
go
time.
out and do land nav, and everybody else got to go and like, you know, eat China buffet and shit. And I went and had to do that. Like I was not an experienced soldier yet.
Yeah.
You know, I knew how to do what I was told. I didn't know how to operate on my own. I didn't know how to make decisions. I mean, I did, but not with confidence and not for a reason. It was all on instinct, you know. And the team leader I had at the time who sent me off to school, he was like, when you're doing stuff, just our squad leader's name was Sergeant Brown, Jeremy Brown, who works for TACAS now. But he was like, just do what Sergeant Brown would do. Like, whenever you're doing what's going on, just do what Sergeant Brown would do. Right? So that, to me, was like, be aggressive, be violent.
Yeah.
Right? And whenever I would just scream or, you know, right side bound, left side hold, left side bound, right side hold, like, that got me through it.
Yeah. And I think the reflection is a lot of us that were that same age group. Because what class were you? You were
199.
199. So I was right after you. Actually, no, 199. You were before me. I was 500. Started in 99 wintertime and ended January of whatever, or January, February of 00.
Yeah.
So I was right after you. But I remember that time period. All the guys there that were our ages, 18, 19 years old, they didn't expect, I didn't see that they expected us to be academic superstars. Yeah. Like, I remember doing the Warno and just reading the template and like nugging through it, but I was confident, I was loud, and I was aggressive. I was decisive. Yeah. And those things got you through because they didn't have an expectation you would understand like an officer would that was getting out of infantry officer basic course. And I noticed that all the guys who were young like us that graduated, and I went through straight through, we did so because we demonstrated competency through confidence. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the times I only got one positive spot report, which they never, you know, give. And I didn't even know an RI was around, but I was in a gun team. It was me, another bat boy, and a major who worked. It's like his 5th time in Ranger School or something. Yeah. You know, he was he worked in the Corps S3 at 18th Airborne Corps. I won't say his name because he was a turd. But he was just dilly fart fucking around, you know, in the patrol base, like rifling through his ruck. I remember now. He was looking for chow in his ruck. And I'm like, man, we're in Florida phase in Ranger School. If you got food, you know it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there's no like, oh, look, I found this thing. Yeah. Like, no.
You know.
And he just wouldn't stop looking for food in his ruck. And I just was like, you piece of shit. And I just fucking was like knife handing him as a fucking PFC, you know? And this RI walks up, he's like, what's your roster number? And I was like, I thought I was in trouble. And he like came up, he gave me a minor plus spot report for, I don't remember what it was for. It was like motivating my peers or some shit. And he was like, square away. But yeah, that's like you said, that's kind of what got you through. And I remember, you know, I got one go in planning, and they made me like, whatever squad leader was the guy who was supposed to make sure everybody kept awake and like did that. So like, all I really had to do was walk around and put boot to ass. You know what I mean? Yeah. I didn't have to know anything. Yeah. And then all my other patrols were for actions on because I knew how to do that. Yeah. You know,
so you get straight through.
Yeah. I went straight through. Yeah. By the hair of my chin.
Yeah. But it's actually, I mean, back then even it was rare to go straight through. I mean, everybody I went through from the old guard, from the 3rd Infantry Regiment, recycled, and it just was a thing. The accepting of the reality was you were going to recycle a phase. And to go straight through is a kind of a testament, again, to competency, but also some luck. I know something like I felt lucky.
Big luck, man. Yeah. I mean, and it's also an RI roulette thing, you know. And I take back and I'm like, when I was a staff sergeant, if I saw me going through, I would like be like, oh, look at this guy, you know,
so cute.
Yeah. And I remember, you know, one of the my primary leadership go I got in mountains. It was a recon, and I checked all the blocks for this recon. I never even saw the objective. But he was like, yeah, you're in the right spot. I mean, it was like, you know, a tree line further, but I saw a road intersection. I was like, this must be it. And I just recce'd this road intersection, just like 20 meters through this wood line. there was like an actual objective that I was supposed to recce. And he was like, why'd you stop there? I was like, well, I was a linear danger area. I thought it would be stupid to cross that on a recon.
Yeah.
He's like, okay. And he gave me a go, you know? So that was like him being like, bling, should I give this kid a go or not? Yeah, you're a go, you know, because I was confident about it, you know, too. So, yeah, it was just the things that were, you know, besides the kind of academic aspect, I remember the things in Ranger School were like I said, that grind. There wasn't really a horizon a lot of times, you know.
It was tough to see it that long out.
Yeah, like that. That second field problem in mountains, it's like 8 days, you know, and like I was, again, winter class, I just hit, it was like same shit, like 36 and raining, horrible. And then at night it would drop below freezing. And I remember all the clothes in my ruck were wet. Everything on me was wet. And I just had I was out of food. I had nothing in my mind to cling to for comfort, like no goal, and was just like, son of a bitch, man.
Yeah, this is tough.
This sucks. And like being so cold on an ambush line that I'm like shivering uncontrollably, and then I stop shivering, and then I'm like, oh shit, that's bad.
Yeah.
You know?
What were the thoughts? Were there any specific thoughts that maybe were in your happy place that allowed you to kind of just get through the next day? Or is it the tactic of like, hey, I'll just quit after chow tomorrow? Like, what was it? Was that you didn't have no chow? Yeah,
it was. For me, it was, I don't want to have to do this again.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to start over. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's just a little memory unlock when I had to go to RASP 2 to become a first sergeant. I remember,
which is crazy.
One of the events they had us do, and I was so like just salty poopy pants pissed.
Yeah.
There's a huge climbing wall at Benning, like a rock climbing wall.
Ugh.
You know, it's like 100 feet tall or whatever.
Yeah.
And you had to climb that thing. And I was just like, I don't know how to rock climb, man. Like that's a skill. That's not like a gut through it. And I was going up that thing, and my forearms were just so engorged with blood. But I was like 2/3 of the way up. I was like, if I give into this, I'm gonna have to go up this again.
Yeah.
You know. So it's like toughness through laziness, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
You just don't want to have to do it again.
Yeah.
And then also there were, you know, by that point in Ranger School, like by that like second half of mountain phase, you care about the guys you're with.
Yeah, you build enough rapport with them.
Yeah, and I had a couple of really great Ranger buddies. Like we had kind of a trifecta Ranger buddy team. There's this dude named DeBole, who was a BCO 275 guy who I just met in Ranger School, and then a lieutenant from the Canadian Army, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry.
Wow.
Rob Riddell. And we were close, you know, and like we really gave a shit about each other, and I didn't want to let them down, you know.
Interesting.
And yeah, and they treated me really well. Like I would carry heavy shit, and I wasn't always super hungry. So like DeBall was smart. But I was very sleepy. I was a sleepy guy.
I was a hungry ranger, not a sleepy ranger.
Right. So I would give DeBall fucking food. I would give him like, every once in a while I would like take a main meal and be like, here you go. And he'd be like, you know, I'm like, and then, you know, if he was pulling security and I was like dozing off, he'd just like watch out for me. Let me get a few Z's.
Yeah.
You know, so that was a big thing that got me through Ranger School as well.
The camaraderie was the first time that you kind of leaned on each other to get through a difficult circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. In Ranger School for sure. We didn't have that in RIP. RIP was a very like, that was.
Yeah. Is that more of an individual event?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So you get, let's talk about war, because you get propelled into war. Our timeline is almost exactly the same as far as our military experience. And you get to 9/11 and you get into your first rotation of war. What was the taste of war as compared to the training? And did training set you up for all the resilience you needed in combat? Were you like, yeah, I get it now? Or were you like, oh shit, this is very different?
No, I mean, honestly, I remember thinking how easy war was, you know, and there were some times like those first couple Afghanistans where we were doing like old school Ranger shit, like search and destroy, sweep and clear, whatever you want to call it, movement to contact.
Yeah.
we didn't see much contact. You know, I didn't shoot my gun until my third deployment, but we were, you know, it sucked. It was patrolling, you know what I mean? And that did suck, but it was also like, okay, we are now the people who decide what's affecting us, right? So if everybody's a drone, as a leader in combat, you can be like, you know, we need to fucking stop and we need to let dudes get a couple hours rack because dudes are droning. You know, whereas in Ranger School, it's like they push you to get that. Like,
yeah.
So, you know, the priorities of work that you get graded on in Ranger School, you actually get to decide what they are. You know what I mean? So you don't have to be like, all right, we're going to get in a clandestine patrol base here and everybody wipe down your rifles. Like, we haven't shot our rifles. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, everybody go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then when you wake up, eat chow. You know? So it did show you like, but it did show you what those priorities of work were for and how to decide when and where to use them, to where you could kind of give yourself a vote. You know, the enemy gets the last vote, obviously, if you're, you know, running and gunning for 3 days, which, you know, has happened to dudes. Like, you're not going to be able to do that. But to the best of your ability, you can keep yourself comfortable. You know, you can be like, oh, it's raining. Let's throw on our Gore-Tex, you know, like to kind of preserve the fighting strength of yourself and your unit, you know. But I think it just showed, you know, Ranger School and all those things shows you like, hey, here's how far you can get broken down and still operate. Now it's up to you as a leader in combat to use all the tools at your, you know, disposal, given the enemy situation, to make sure that you're at the absolute peak fighting strength whenever you do have a meeting engagement with the enemy.
That's so, like, I thought when you were saying that, I got issued, you know, the black Polar Tech top, and it was super cool because if you had that, you were in soft, right? But I remember, you know, when you're going through training in Ranger School, you're limited on snivel because there's parameters that are set for you. But I remember putting that on the first time putting that on and going, oh, I don't have to be cold. Oh, I could take my hands and put them in my pockets. Yeah, that's different. So I'm not constricted by the institution or by the protocol. I could kind of free think through situations, and nothing is worse than suffering in Ranger School because I've already been there. Yeah, and so this is like easy compared to that.
Yeah, I mean, there were you know, training scenarios in Ranger Battalion that were absolutely way harder than anything I did physically in Ranger School. You know, like stupid long movements, But you know what? I could always reach into my like LC and pull out a starburst. You know, there was always some little piece of comfort to cling to.
So funny. Yeah. That morale.
Yeah, and I've to this day I hate, you know, like a lot of SEALs hate being cold and wet. I hate being hungry. Like that feeling you get in your jaw when you're like super hungry. Like I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So like humping a ruck all day long on like a caloric deficit is like a feeling that I don't like.
It doesn't feel good at all. Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, and you know, I experience it in SEER school as well.
Yeah, painful.
Where it's like true hunger is something that, like, you know, you read in history books and stuff, like that will completely take over your mind as a human being. Yeah. And you saw it. I'm sure you saw. I saw it with guys that just couldn't handle it.
Yeah. They went out of their mind. They were literally lost.
Yeah. You know, the dumpster divers and shit like that. I'm like, bro, you're gonna dive into the garbage to get something to eat, and you're gonna ruin your career because you're hungry. Like, okay, I mean, this does suck, but like, have some self-respect. You know what I mean?
I had a guy break into a semi truck during our SEER evasion lane, and the truck was running, and he stole the dude's lunch, a container, which is a cooler full of chow. And I was like, was this planned? But I was like, you're going to get in trouble. But then when he came back with it, I'm like, I'm tearing all this shit up. I am eating the crap out of this.
Dude,
it was amazing. He never got caught, but I'm like, again, I'm like, we just ate like 72 hours ago. We're in an invasion corridor, and you're going to risk your career by breaking into somebody's vehicle to eat.
Or get shot. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, or get shot.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that's probably the hungriest I've ever been was on the evasion in SEER.
Yeah, same.
We had my evasion team in SEER was awesome though, because that was before I went to SEER, before it was part of the SF pipeline, right? So like my evasion team was like, I had a master sergeant from 7th group in it. You know,
Oh, wow.
he'd been in group for like 15 years, 12 years, whatever.
Wow.
He was a native Bolivian, like a jungle person.
Oh, wow.
So like outdoorsy as shit, like could track, could do all this shit. Was just an amazing soldier, you know. And you remember they have like the 82nd guys out there, like, or logistics people as your aggressors, you know.
Yeah.
So he came with this plan. He like kind of reverse tracked the aggressors and was like, we're just gonna circle and we're gonna follow them. And that's what we did. We just followed them, and they had like a little, like kind of a assignment to try and track us because they knew our evasion corridor. So he's like, we'll just follow them. And the whole time we're following, we're like picking up MRE trash, picking up fucking all this stuff because it's like some, you know, logistics unit that they didn't know how to be in the field, so they're just like throwing shit away.
Chow.
Yeah,
all
we're
over.
like picking up lemon pound cake, sweet, you know. But yeah, that guy was awesome, man. Oscar Arredondo.
When you started experiencing, what was the first time that you experienced death or somebody getting killed, and then how did that change the game? Because in my own personal experiences, it's the feeling of this is real, and now it's not training, it's not, you know, combat is not philosophy. It's like this has consequence.
Yeah, I mean the first death I experienced was about, I mean, it wasn't an enemy contact or anything, but it was about 10 hours after I got to, you know, this is back, this was like what, April of 2002, something like that. It's the first time we deployed. We relieved 1st Battalion at Bagram, and we were basically, they didn't really know what to do with us yet as Rangers, so we were kind of like a QRF, and we were obviously support for TST raids for other units. We later started going out and doing the kind of sweep and clear stuff, but get to Bagram. Back then, Bagram was like, it was like being at a FOB. There was like no running water. It sucked. Shitting in buckets, burning shit, all that. Well, they just put up a HESCO wall around our compound, and there was I think it was a Norwegian EOD unit going through. And if you remember, Bagram was just, we first got there, it was full of mines.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Because when the Russians pulled out, they just carpet bombed it with mines. So we're sitting there. It's like we'd been there we got there like right when it got dark, but we were all wired up, and like the sun's coming up. They start to go out and do their clear, and like, you know, from here to that wall over the HESCO, just boom, and some Norwegian EOD guy got vaporized by a mine, and kind of saw it, and you could kind of feel it, and we're like, oh shit, like, because they talk like, hey, there's a danger of mines, but you're like, okay, whatever, I'm not gonna step on a mine, and then you're like, whoa, dude just got smoked by a mine, you know. That rain did animate it pretty clear we were in a dangerous place. But it was still, you know, not super, still didn't really have the I still didn't lose that sense of like invincibility, you know, for a while. And that really came from, you know, we had casualties in battalion and stuff. Actually, yesterday is the anniversary. The first guy who I was like really friends with that got killed in the GWAT, his name was Jay Blessing. He was actually the 275 Battalion armorer and was just out doing a log run, like going from, we had a little FOB in Asadabad up to Barrancourt. He was driving, you know, just escorting a logistics train. And this was, you know, 2003. It was before we did up armor. It was before we had jammers. And, yeah, he just got IED'd, got blown up, launched across the, whatever, I don't remember what river that was. Konar River. Yeah. But that was the first, like, friend. And I, like, heard about that. I was like, oh, shit, man.
They named Camp Blessing after him,
Yeah. But really the first, you know, deaths that, like, I was on target for, we had some guys get shot and all that. But I did a deployment in summer 2005 in Western Iraq. And one of the other units out there did a day VI. They basically, the whole 60 just got tuned up. So this troop was pretty much non-mission capable. So they put an RFF out. They were like, hey, we need to get like...
Is that when the helicopter landed on the VI and they smoked the whole thing and everybody was a casualty?
Yep.
You got shot in the mouth.
Yeah, both pilots were shot.
Yeah, he had to use a rag he continued to serve.
Yeah.
I remember that. That happened.
None of those guys got killed.
Yeah, none of them got killed.
But
through the legs. Only person didn't get shot was one of the medics, and he treated everybody. Well, I remember exactly when that happened.
Yeah. So they were kind of no longer, fully mission capable.
Yeah.
So they, my company was in Baghdad at the time. They put in kind of an RFF for 6 Rangers. So they kind of asked like, hey, can you send like good dudes? So I was the senior squad leader in my company. And they hit me up and they were like, hey, pick whatever other 5 dudes you want. I just took 5 guys from my squad. I didn't like make a super squad or anything, which they were because they were awesome because they were my squad.
Yeah, they listened to you. Yeah.
Yeah. But so yeah, we went out and joined that troop, and we're basically part of that troop for the remainder of that deployment.
For day VIs?
No, we didn't.
Just for hits.
We didn't do any more day VIs after that.
Yeah, vehicle interdiction sorry, I'm using acronyms. Yep.
So no more VIs, but we were the only strike force in Western Iraq at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was a dangerous time period. I think for Joint Special Operations Command, that might in history that year might go down as one of the most casualty producing years.
Yeah, it was. That's the time frame. I can recall sitting in the talk with the other team leaders in the troop, and we talked through the tactical call out. Like we were like, all right, we're gonna do this. We didn't have a name for it yet.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, we're just gonna circle it, get on bullhorns, and I'm a ranger. I'm like, what?
Yeah. What's that mean?
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, they'd figured out at TTPs that we'd blow the vehicle gate, come in, blow the PAX gate, and enter and clear the building. So they would just let us in little by little, and then just like hand you your lunch at the foothold,
Yeah.
And that trip is really kind of what, I had my kind of like Ranger ethos, but that trip is really what forged my kind of like warrior ethos. That's where like I got the taste of blood, and I really like, I knew this was like, you fight, you fight fucking dirty. You shoot them first. You don't give them a chance.
Yeah.
'Cause it was, that whole trip, every night we were going out, we were in contact, like hot HLZs, enemy troops maneuvering on us, larger numeric force, like all those things happened on that trip. But I was with those guys, and it was super humbling to be around, guys of that caliber. 'Cause I think back then, the unit was a lot older.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys, if they weren't there, they would be a platoon sergeant or a first sergeant in battalion, or they would be a team sergeant or a company sergeant major in SF.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all super experienced guys who were like gods to me.
Yeah.
And the first kind of like experience with death on target that I was on was a guy named Steve Langmack,
Mm-hmm.
who's
I remember Steve.
Yeah.
7th group guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Previously 175 guy.
Yeah.
He was my pre-ranger instructor.
Wow.
And when I was in pre-ranger, I was a little rascal,
Mm-hmm.
and I froze his PC and gave it to him the day we went to Darby. And he was like, you better fucking pray you pass Ranger School and I don't have to come back through here. And he was like mean. Like, it wasn't like, oh, this is going to be funny. Like, he was mean, man.
Yeah.
And when I showed up out there to Al-Assad, he was the new guy in the troop.
Mm-hmm.
And he recognized me still. That had been, 4 years earlier, whatever. And he was like, he smiled. He's like, son of a bitch. But like, they kind of made him our sort of handler. You know? So like all the sort of bitch work that they had, we did together. So he used that as like a learning opportunity. So we built all the charges with him.
Mm-hmm.
We rehabbed all the fast ropes. We rehabbed fast ropes. We hung the fast ropes. We, retaped the doors of the helos. Like all the little things that the new guys had to do, like Steve Langmack and us did it. And then, he was also, I had a great relationship with that troop. I knew, the troop commander. He'd been a PL in my company. So like all the butt sniffing was not really there. And I very much felt like I could chime in, but there's also a level of comfort that you just don't have with those guys. Like, oh man, this guy's like a god to me. Whereas Steve Langmack was like, he was that, like, I can really look up to this guy. He's a great mentor, but he was also approachable and like accessible. Talk to him every day, multiple times a day. And yeah, when he was killed, it was like, holy shit, you know.
So was Steve the one, he got shot in the nods the night before?
Yep.
And survived that.
Yep.
And then it happened again the following night. Was he shot off the Little Bird? Or
No,
he shot on target.
He was on a quad.
Yeah.
When he got shot through the nods?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So we kind of split the force. We had guys go in early on quads and stuff, and they did a hit deeper into the town. And when they were target secure and heading back, we went and hit another target, landed on the X on it. And as they were driving up, they got ambushed as they were shooting at our helos. It was really complex. And that was actually the first time I heard the radio call Hot LZ. And I was like, this is fucking awesome. Yeah. I was like, I'm in the nom, man. Like, I've got my feet dangling out of a 60, you know, and I'm like going into a Hot LZ. Like, this is what I signed up for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember they came up, they did a link up with us after we had target secure, and yeah, he'd gotten shot like right to left through his nods driving, and everybody's like, luck. Yeah. And then I don't know if it was the next night or the night, but it's foggy, but yeah. It was one of those things. They sucked the guys into the foothold, and then just, you know,
ambushed.
The only thing that took the initiative back was the K9 and a lot of frags. But yeah, that was wild, and that whole, I mean, that target we exfilled under fire on the target he was killed on, and it just showed you, like, doesn't matter how good you are, like, this shit's dangerous. But lead with violence. You know what I mean? Lead with like ultra violence in that operating environment.
What was the mood of the troop and you guys? Was it sombering and then it's like time to go to work? Because I know whenever we've taken casualties, whether it was task force or our own team, there was a sense of like, hey, this is part of what we do. It's time to get back to fucking work and kill bad guys.
Yeah, it put a hot poker in our ass. I mean, we were already, something I'm really proud of on that trip, and those dudes I work with, was like, we were extremely aggressive. Like, put the bad guys on their heels. You know, we called them the sieges. Like, we would pick a spot like Rawa or Al Qaim or Arabit. Arabit was where Steve was killed, and we were like, we're gonna siege this. So we're just gonna hit this bitch every night for like 5 days. We're going to hit it until they stop coming out to fight, you know? And one of the nights after that, our intel guy, who was awesome, we kind of did our mission planning. We were just, you know, there's that lull. You do your mission planning, you do your con op, you kind of do your brief, and there's like, you know, 40 minutes before you have to get jocked up and get on the birds or whatever. And in that time, intel guy comes in. He's like, hey, he asked for the troop commander. He's like, come on. And he like looks up at the screen. He's like, they just pulled a technical up and they've got like, you know, armed roving guards around this. And I remember the troop commander was like, guess we better bring our guns then. That was his answer, you know? And I was like, fuck yeah. You know,
I belong here.
Yeah. And, you know, I've experienced other leaders through the years that would have gone ghost white there and been like, you know, but he was like, no, let's go kill it. Those look like dudes that need to be killed. Let's go kill them. You know,
I miss the mindset and the feeling of that belonging, that culture of, I would just say, a joint task force, because all the action arms, which eventually became TF-16, TF-17, which you guys set the stage and the groundwork. I mean, cooperating with special missions units and developing that rapport and relationship, so much so that Stanley McChrystal on down were like, yeah, this is the thing. We need to just build this machine, execute these action arms, and let them kill everybody. Mm-hmm. And we have to cut the podcast because we're keeping it to an hour, but we're going to make this, I just officially called it, we're going to make this a 2-part series with Jariko. we'll do the first part, which is kind of his first experiences in the lead up at the very beginning of the GWAT and kind of experiencing those tragic circumstances and the resilience you needed. And then we'll continue this because that's only the beginning, right? I assume.
Yeah. That was that I think gave me the taste, and I don't want to call it the addiction, but
yeah,
I loved it. I loved going out and putting those dudes
in the dirt.
Into the dirt. Yeah, like, not to sound cheesy, but
yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah, it's like it is a thing. I'm actually very intrigued to talk about that because I'm reading Dopamine Nation right now, and a great book that talks about this addiction to these different things. But at that time, in that time period, there was an addiction in the GWAT to mission sets and going after bad guys. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that more. Jariko, where can people find you just on social and stuff?
I am Laidback Berserker on Instagram, LAIDBERSERKER. Mm-hmm. And just look for me on all Black Rifle channels, Black Rifle Coffee, YouTube and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the podcast for Mission Resilience, episode 1 with Jariko Denman. We'll get to episode 2 or part 2 of this. We just can't stop this. There's too much juicy stuff in here for you guys. I appreciate you guys. You guys can see all the links below for Jariko. Also subscribe to the Black Rifle Coffee podcast if you haven't done so already. I host a series called The Might Force Presents, and you can see all the stuff there. I appreciate you. Until next time. Peace out, guys.